different type of way of looking at photography. Backstory is when I first started photography was in college, and when I first started, my teacher at my community college I started with was very technical. He was the type of photography instructor that was so technical that when we turned in a picture, he had a scale, like a ruler, that he would put up against the print and measure the different tonalities of gray. And I couldn't quite grasp that. I wanted to make pictures that were like nearly all black with a streak of white, or vice versa. And I just really couldn't gel with him, but I was totally hooked on photography. So fortunate enough, I transferred to San Jose State and found a professor there my first semester named Brian Taylor, who I've since become good friends with, who taught me this concept. He was more about, you know what, don't worry about technicals. You can read about technicals in a book, or nowadays we can look it up online. Worry more about developing the eye. This is called developing a photographer's eye. So I'll break out of it a couple times to sort of show you a few pieces of equipment. Not a huge note taking concept, so just let it ride. All right, let's go with it. Let's play it out. So developing a photographer's eye. So the first one is that I used to teach a class for people like at a camera store a ways back. And so when I first started doing this, people wanted to be able to know, well, what can I do to take better pictures? So I came up with sort of 3 rules. These three rules really help in photography, but they're not always steadfast rules for our class. But I'll go over them. Okay? The first of the 3 things is, remember, the camera can take vertical pictures too. I see all too many people only taking horizontal photographs. So here's a picture of my 2 sons. This is quite some time ago. And this was like at a motel. We were going to Disneyland or something like that. This is at a motel, and the boys were goofing around. Took it horizontally, and not the greatest picture I've ever shot. Mainly because, what's the emphasis of the picture? Is it the bed, or is it the nightstand from the motel or whatever it is? So there's nothing that's really, really like, wow, that's an amazing picture to me. Because there's so much background, it's kind of hard to see that. It's hard to sort of make them out in that the background really doesn't tell the story, isn't sort of adding to the story. Whereas if I simply turn the camera vertically, I get that instead. And to me, that's a far better picture. And that's not just cropping. It's not like I crop the picture in Photoshop. I physically turn the camera sideways. Okay. So the second one is, not every subject needs to be in the center of the frame. So not always do we have to centerize things. We don't always have to keep them locked in the middle of the picture. So this is a picture of my son Thomas. This is ways back when he was playing Little League Baseball. And not a bad picture, not a great picture, not really to me even a good picture. It's not a picture that I would keep or say, hey Thomas, remember when you did this? Because it doesn't really tell me the story of what it was like for him to play baseball. And so what I enjoy about photography is being able to create a story without people having to, sort of be explained to them what it is. And that part of it is, not everything has to be in the middle. I see all too many people when we're out and about in places, and everything's smack dab in the middle. Well, off center is good, like this. So that to me tells the story. There's some intensity obviously in his face when he's getting ready to throw the ball. And I don't have to explain to you, well, this is my son Thomas. He was on the Phillies. He liked you can sort of get, to me, there's a story to be seen in this photograph itself. So not everything has to be dead centered in the picture. The third thing, which is sort of odd, sort of counterintuitive to what most people think, is if you're going to take pictures of people outside, use the flash out all the time. So you're going to take pictures of someone outside, use the flash. Now, I will say this is one rule that needs to be not adhered to all the time in our class. I will let you know when you can use a flash in our assignments. So here's a picture of my son Scott, again, quite some time ago. And you can't hardly make him out because there's this huge hat on his head that's blocking the sun from his face. So not the greatest picture in the world. Hard to tell whose kid this is. Whereas here, I'm using a flash on the camera so that it lights up the boys' faces. We're at Disneyland this time, and it lights up their faces, makes them look fantastic, even though they're wearing hats in the sun. But because I'm using a flash on the camera, it lights them up to where we can totally see it. Now, again, it's counterintuitive to a lot of people's thoughts, and we'll talk more about this in this particular class about how to achieve these results. Okay. All right, so lens types. There's lots of detail about lenses. So these numbers I'm going to give you don't always represent what your camera has. We'll talk about the differences in lenses and numbers and stuff like that. But we're going to go off of what they call 35 millimeter cameras or what they call full frame cameras. We'll get to that as we go along. A 50 millimeter lens on a full frame camera would equal what we see. So we sort of see what's equal to a 50 millimeter lens on a full frame camera. If you went less than 50 millimeters, like for example 28 millimeters, that would be wide angle. And we went more than 50 millimeters, like for example a 300 millimeter lens, that would be telephoto. So we use different lenses to tell a different story. So if I'm going to go to the Mission Santa Barbara, for example, I might use a lens like this with a wide angle lens. This is an exceptionally wide angle lens that sort of captures the entire front of the mission. Whereas if my son Thomas is jumping into the pool, I might use something like this, where the telephoto lens not only brings him closer, but it also makes that background go more out of focus automatically. Okay, so different lenses tell different stories. So for example, the camera I have here is my sort of everyday camera that I use professionally. And the lens on this, you can sort of see this really big sort of bubble on the front. And this is a really super wide lens. This is almost, when I make it wide, it's almost 180-degree view. So it'll see almost side to side. I use this a lot for like real estate photography, things like that, where I'm taking pictures inside, that type of thing. So that would be a wide angle lens. This would be a telephoto lens. So there's a longer lens. So you see the picture in the background behind my screen here. Back here, the Blue Angels, that was taken with this lens here. So a longer telephoto style lens that can bring distant objects in close. Now most of you probably have a lens on your camera that's equal to an 18 to 55. If you look at the lens numbers on the front of your camera, most likely it's 18 to 55. And so what that means is that you can go from a little bit of wide angle to a little bit of telephoto. Most things we're going to do in this class are perfectly fine with that lens. That's a great go-to lens. But we'll talk about other lenses and numbers and what they do and things like that. All right, so back to the slideshow. I already played this one, didn't I? There we go. All right, electronic flash. Now, most of your cameras, not everybody, but most everybody's cameras has a built-in or internal flash. So it's that little pop-up flash I spoke about last week live, is that little flash that pops up. The problem with that flash is, although it's a flash, it does provide for pretty hard shadows. It doesn't look great on people's faces. External flashes, the larger flashes that go on top of the camera, give you a ton more creative control and better looking pictures. So for example, here's a picture of Thomas. Again, this is a long time ago, with a built-in little internal pop-up flash. And you can see it's not a very good picture because of a couple things. One is that horrendous shadow all the way around him is just horrendous flash shadow. The other thing is, because the flash is so close to the lens, as you know, so in proximity, it makes things look flat. It makes his face look very flat. Whereas if I take the flash and instead of hitting it directly, I take it and I can bounce it off of like a wall or a ceiling, I can get something like this, which to me is 1,000 times better, because now we don't have that hard shadow. You know, we don't have that hard shadow blocking the back of him. You can see that he does have a nose. It's actually three-dimensional. You can see his eye tones much, much better in this one here. And just a much more generally a much better picture than I have with a direct flash. So there are some creative controls you can use with the bigger flashes. Now on flashes, the small or built-in flash, the little pop-up flash, never carries more than 15 feet. There's never an example when you can use that flash and it goes more than 15 feet. So for example, when you see things like a sporting event, like maybe like the Super Bowl, and you see at the kickoff, you see all these flashes going off, those people are getting amazing pictures of the rows in front of them, because the flashes don't cover the distance. So when I was graduating with my master's degree, kind of a big deal for me at least, and so we're at this theater in Santa Barbara, and the provost, the main person for the school, is going to put this special thing on the back of my head, back of my neck, for the master's degree program and everything like that. Oh, by the way, external flashes, the big flashes, allow for further distance. So that moment, that moment that I'm going to graduate, well, there it is. That's me graduating. You barely see me because the flashes don't cover the distance. Built-in flashes don't cover more than 15 feet, period. Whereas an external flash, the flash that goes on top of your camera, covers a significantly further distance. This is a flash that goes on top of your camera, and it's powerful enough that it not only captures the football player, but it also captures, you can see little light dots in the picture, like one to the left of his head, and you see one like on a person wearing a red jacket. Those are reflectors on jackets and stuff like that reflects back into the lens. So it's a very powerful flash, these bigger flashes. Now, one of the minor problems we have with flashes is red eye. A lot of cameras have a feature called red eye reduction. The problem with red eye reduction, it only reduces the red eye. It doesn't eliminate it. And what it does, usually it has some sort of flash that fires ahead of time or some light that comes on to try to reduce the amount of red eye in a picture. Red eye, of course, can be eliminated in software. We can take Photoshop or other programs and eliminate it. But there's a way, there's some techniques to eliminate red eye, but we have to understand how red eye works. What happens is that here's a sort of a cross-section of a human eye. And if we thought of a flash going across, if you have a flash that's really close to the lens, like a built-in flash, it's going to go out and hit at the same angle as the flash does. So it would be similar to where if you were taking a picture, let's say you're taking a picture of a bathroom, and you aim the flash into the mirror, it's going to come right back and reflect right back at you. So how would you eliminate that? How could you eliminate the reflection in a mirror? You could stand off to one side. So if you change the angle, it's going to change the reflection. And eye works the same. It's a lot like pool or billiards, in the fact that if you shoot a pool ball straight forward, it comes right back at you. If you shoot it at an angle, it bounces around. Same thing happens with light. So if we have, I'm going to go out of this screen for just a second. So if we have a camera like this, my camera does not have a built-in flash up here. Okay, but the built-in flashes, when they pop up like that, the flash is super close to the lens, which means it's going out at an angle, and when it goes out, it bounces right back and comes right back into the lens. Okay, but when we use these larger flashes like this on the camera, like that. So now the flash is up here. When the light goes out of the flash, it hits the subject, and when it comes back, it's going to bounce, and it's going to hit at a different angle than the lens is. So that's why with these flashes, we tend to have a lot less red eye than the built-in type flashes. Don't want that to fall over. All right, back to the show. Now, there's one or two other little things. What happens is the reason we get red eye to begin with is because when the light hits directly through the eye, the fluid that's in our eye is very viscous, it's very clear, and it can reflect back out. It reflects the corpuscles in the back of the eye. So it happens because our pupils open up. When we're in a lower light situation, our pupils tend to open up really large, like when we're in a darker room. And so that's why you tend to never have red eye outdoors. Because outdoors, our pupils are going to be much smaller because they're trying to prevent that much light from coming in. So a couple different ways to get rid of red eye without using software or without buying really expensive flashes. Number one is turn on more lights. Wherever you are, if you can, turn on more lights. Number two is open up any window blinds. If you can make it brighter in the room, chances are you're going to have a lot less light reduction or red eye reduction. The house we used to have, not this house, I used to live in Stockton. I'm still in therapy. And so the house in Stockton had a downstairs family room that the windows faced the east. So for Christmas mornings, I'd get up early before the boys would come down, and I'd pull the blinds open as much as I could. All had these really big windows, and all three blinds, I'd open them all up and turn every light on in the room. The boys would come down and they're like, geez, Dad, it's like a movie studio in here. I'm like, yeah, but you're not going to have red eye. So opening up more lights, turning on more windows, opening up more windows, turning on more lights will definitely reduce the amount of it. Plus, also too, slightly backing up if your camera has a lens, which most of you, again, have that 18 to 55. If you back up slightly and zoom in, you're also going to highly reduce the amount of red eye. So let me show you what happens when you do this. When you open up the windows and do these things, plus also you back up and zoom in, you get this. So there's Thomas. This is for his second birthday, I believe it was. And so you can see those pupils are huge, huge pupils. And also, too, you can see the shadow behind him. See that shadow behind him? Like if you look to the left of his cheek, you can see that dark shadow back there. But he doesn't have red eye, not because I altered it. I didn't alter this. This is straight out of the camera. But he doesn't have red eye mainly because I backed up and zoomed in a little bit, and it's going to eliminate that red eye. One last note about red eye is the fact that if you took a picture of me and my son Thomas, you took a picture of me and my two sons, my son Thomas and I will have red eye every time. Every single time it seems like we're going to have red eye, whereas my older son Scott has yet to have red eye. The reason that is because people with lighter colored eyes tend to have red eye more often than people with darker colored eyes. All right, let's go on to camera modes. I spoke about that we're going to talk about these modes. Unfortunately, we're not going to use them a lot. There's one or two times we might use them, but for the most part, we're not going to use them a lot in this class. So let's go over a few of them. Every camera has probably about 8 billion more than I'm going to show you, but I'm going to show you some of the basic ones. The first one is portrait mode. What portrait mode does is it tends to put the subject in focus and puts the background out of focus because that tends to make a better portrait. If you're taking a portrait of somebody, generally you're not concerned about the background as much as you're worrying about the expression on the person's face. So this is a picture of my niece, and where you can see that she's in focus, but the background is completely out of focus. Okay, it's so far out of focus that if I didn't point out that that's a grandfather clock behind her, you may not have known that that's a grandfather clock behind her. Now, the other thing, too, that's going to come up in a slide later is cropping in camera. When I personally shoot, I tend to crop, and I tend to crop the picture in the camera, which means I get kind of close. Notice that she's actually being held by her mother. In the fact that you can't, because I shot in so close, you don't really sort of get a sense of that because I shot it so close. This is not, and also, too, all the pictures I'm showing you, none of them are cropped. They're straight out of the camera. All right, the other camera mode is landscape mode. It puts everything in focus. So from the closest point to the furthest point, everything's in focus for landscape modes. Like this. I'm at Yosemite and taking a picture with this half dome off in the distance and this tree in the foreground. So everything is 100% in focus. This also prevents the flash from firing. So if you think, I want to make sure the flash doesn't go up. Well, the landscape mode would do that. Macro mode. It's for close-up photography. So getting really, really close. And I'll show you a technique next week on how to take super duper close-ups. So here's a close-up. This is an orchid. So this is an orchid. An orchid's about the size of like a $50 coin. You know, they're not that very big. So I'm super, super close to this one here while I'm taking this. All right, a couple more modes. Night flash mode. And some of them call it night portrait, night flash. There's all sorts of different names. But it generally has a picture of a person and a moon or a star or something like that in the background. And what this means is it allows the background light to register on the image. So that's a technical way of saying it. That's like, what? What are you talking about? I don't mean that. Well, I don't know what you mean. Okay, what that means is that when you take a flash picture, you're actually sort of taking two images. There's one image that is illuminated by the flash itself, and a second image that's illuminated by the amount of time that those shutters open after the flash. So most cameras don't take really long photographs, meaning that they register the flash but not the background. So if you were going to go sit on a ride, like a Harley Davidson ride with your son in an arcade, you could have lasers coming out of your head because the flash doesn't cover to the background. Because not only does the flash not cover, but the shutter isn't open very long to sort of record that light in the background. Where if you want sort of a better picture, you get that. That's actually with a flash. That's a flash picture there. My son's at the Railroad Museum here in Sacramento. And the Railroad Museum is dark. It's very dark in there. So what happens is the flash fires. It records them. We can see the flash went off because in my son Scott, the kid on the right, you can see sort of the flash reflected in his glasses a little bit. And so what happens is the flash captures them pretty well, but the shutter stays open just a little bit longer to sort of record that light in the background. We know that for a couple reasons. One is you can see the train behind them, the little model train, is sort of blurry from the long shutter speed. And on the very far left, there's a woman or someone that's moving, and that's captured as a movement because of the fact that they're moving while I was taking the picture. All right, a couple other modes. Sports mode. People like that sports mode. It gives you the fastest shutter speed possible, which into this week's lesson as far as shutter speed, we saw in the fact that if we take the fastest shutter speed possible, that's not always going to illustrate the story correctly. Meaning that if I take the fastest shutter speed possible and take a picture of let's say, an airplane landing, it freezes it. So the problem with this is an FA-18 Hornet, and it lands at about 125 miles an hour. That does not look like 125 miles an hour. That looks more like the plane is doing like one of those lowriders where it pops the wheels off the ground. It doesn't look like it's moving at all. So like I illustrated in this week's lecture, there's a technique which is you're actually panning the camera with the subject. So you're moving the camera with the subject, and so you get pictures like this. Okay, so you actually move the camera with the subject as it goes by, and you can still get great detail out of it, but you can also get the background to be blurred. Now that looks like it's going 125 miles an hour. Okay. All right, a couple more. There's auto versus program mode. On a lot of your cameras, if you look at the top of it, there's a P or program mode. P stands for program, not professional or something like that. And then auto, a lot of cameras, like if you have a Canon, auto is like a green square. Other cameras like Nikon's have a picture of a camera that's green. Most everybody makes the auto thing in green. So the difference between the two is that program allows alterations and auto is automatic, allowing no control, which means if I put my camera in automatic, the flash will automatically pop up when it wants it to. In program, it goes up when you want it to. So I tend to use the program mode quite a bit. All right, a couple more slides. First off, we're going to talk a little bit about resolution. Resolution is the amount of pixels that recorded the image. So you have terms like 3488 by 2688 or 15.5 megapixel or 11 MP, whatever the term, they all mean the same thing. It's how many pixels recorded that picture, how many little dots picked up light and made an image out of that. But one of the biggest and most important things about digital photography is higher resolution does not make clearer or sharper images. Period. So there isn't, just because one person has an 8 megapixel camera and someone has a 20 megapixel camera, doesn't make better pictures. It just makes larger files. Better pictures come from better lenses. Better lenses make better pictures. Period. Don't worry, we'll talk more about that as we go along. So what is resolution? Well, this is how a pixel count works. Is if you have, let's pretend this gray square is your pixel count, is your sensor. You have 3,648 columns and 2,736 rows. If you multiply the two together, you get close to 10 million. Let's say round up, make it 10 megapixel camera. Not that important. Okay, camera settings 2. Quality in your camera, usually you have a thing where it says fine, medium, and small. You know, some camera manufacturers call it quality. It refers to the compression of the image file, which means when you take a picture, it compresses it down and makes it smaller. We'll talk more about this in another lecture. But essentially, if you make the quality less, you're reducing the file size by compressing and taking out pixels. It also too can lead to what we call the jaggies. So, for example, here's this picture again I have of this boat, and if we take just the part where it says "pai" and blow that up, that's a normal resolution. So you can see it, you know, we can see the tonality from the top to the bottom looks normal. There's not a lot of jaggedy edges around the letters and things like that. It looks pretty smooth. But if we take that picture and save it at a smaller quality on the camera, we take it at a lower quality, it compresses it. That compression is going to lose some quality like that. So the more you compress a picture, the more you get these things called the jaggies, where especially around contrast points, it becomes these little squares that you can see. So reducing image size by changing the compression is usually not the best thing to do. Okay, a couple little minor things, just touching on a few minor points. One is called the rule of thirds. We'll cover this more in a longer lecture, and you'll actually have an assignment on this, but I thought I'd just touch it really quickly. So the rule of thirds is if you have a photograph like this is at Civil War Cemetery, you can divide the picture like that into 3 sections. You can also divide it horizontally into 3 seconds, like sections like this. And the concept of the rule of thirds is the fact that you can put your horizon lines either at the bottom third or the top third to emphasize different things. So for example, if it was just a perfectly blue sky day, there's not a cloud in the sky, maybe you want to put the horizon at the top because just blue sky, although lovely, can be rather boring. Okay. Whereas if it's a day like we had here on a few days ago where it's just this amazing amount of clouds, maybe I want to put the horizon down low to emphasize the clouds. The other concept is sometimes you want to put points of interest in the 4 intersecting lines there. So, but we'll talk more about that later. Last couple ones. Shooting at eye level. If you're going to take pictures of people or even animals, shooting at eye level is a good thing. So this is our dog Dutch. No, this isn't Dutch. This is Dale. Dutch is our dog we have now. This is from a few years ago. So shooting a picture of a dog from overhead doesn't really illustrate. Yes, he had a stuffed dog, but it doesn't really illustrate the picture very well. It doesn't really show him off personality-wise. Whereas if I get down at his eye level, to me that makes a much better picture, 1,000 times better picture if we're shooting at eye level. Rather than this over-the-top type look. So whether it be people or animals, I tend to shoot pictures at eye level. We tend to get better pictures. Second thing, one of the other things is shoot sequences, meaning that your camera can shoot usually pretty quickly, and I'm not afraid to go kind of crazy, so I can go click, 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 click. So this is Dale and my son Thomas messing around. So, I can go through and did all of them turn out? No, but I can sort of pick and see which one I like the most and see which one I wanted to use. Lastly is getting close up in your cropping in camera. I spoke about this when I showed you a picture of my niece. So here's a picture of my 2 sons a few years later. And so not bad, but you got a lot of excess you got a lot of excess on the top there. It's just a lot of stuff on the top there. So not only is it vertical, we've got a lot of excess stuff. So I can get a lot better picture if I do this instead, where I turned to horizontally, and B, I just moved in a little bit closer. Again, these pictures are not cropped in Photoshop. These are straight out of the camera type shots. So cropping in camera to me is one of the better things you can ever do. All right, so there's our lecture. Now, for example, this is one in which I don't expect you to memorize this, or I don't think I'll ever quiz you on it. I may quiz you on what are the 3 things. So the first one is more vertical. Don't be afraid to shoot the camera. The less vertical is good. Horizontal is a good thing. Horizontal and vertical both. Sorry, I'm totally goofing that up. Secondly is not everything has to be in the center of the picture. You can shoot things off-centered oftentimes. And lastly is you can take pictures of people outside, turn the flash on every time. So for example, this picture of the Thunderbirds off-center, just a different look to things. There we go. Thanks, and we'll talk to you on the next